It's the Security Weekly News, episode 261. I'm Doug White, and it's Friday on the week of the 4th December 2022. We've got Ban This Podcast, Rackspace, Agrius, Antwerp, New Zealand Redux, Royal, Lenza, ChatGPT, and more on the Security Weekly News.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
We know that many of you are looking to bolster your security posture with cloud-native app protection and XDR. So if you haven't heard of Uptycs, put them on your radar. They offer both cloud and endpoint security in a single solution. Listeners can use Uptycs for up to 1,000 assets for a full year for only $1. But hurry, this offer is available only through December 31st at securityweekly.com/Uptycs. That's UPTYCS, Uptycs. How is your business staying one step ahead of cybercriminals? Secure your email, applications, network, and data with Barracuda. Protect your business and go from zero to security in no time flat. Whether your team is working in one location or many, Barracuda has solutions that are easy to buy, deploy, and use. Learn how Barracuda can protect your business against ransomware, phishing, and other cyber attacks. Visit securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Barracuda, your journey secured. All right, it's the Security Weekly News. Be sure, last night I was doing a thing for InfraGard, and it was like one of the first sort of like events that we've had since since the pandemic, and it made me think that next Wednesday is the first time in a while we've done the sort of like Security Weekly holiday all day hoo-ha. So you should definitely check that out on the Security Weekly site and see what content you'd like to see, because a whole bunch of content coming next Wednesday. There's a whole bunch of people going to be here. It's starting to sound like, the old days where we had, exciting all-day drunken festivals. Yeah. So be sure and check that out. They got a lot of content. So go look that up and see. I don't even know what I'm supposed to be on yet, but I'm sure we'll all find out. Rackspace confirmed that their outage was indeed a ransomware attack on their hosted exchange. And they called it an isolated disruption, which had that sort of marketing legal feel to it. They said on Friday, the 2nd of December, they became aware of suspicious activity and immediately took proactive measures. Again, very legal sounding. Immediately took proactive measures to isolate the hosted exchange environment to contain the incident, which actually sounds like a good idea. They said they believe the incident was isolated to hosted exchange and that they would notify any customers if they determined in the course of their investigation that any customer data was actually accessed. There was an 8K filing, which is an SEC required document in the United States, but then 8K filing revealed that they expected a loss of revenue this year due to the impact of the ransomware attack. And they went on to say that they did not yet have a timeline for restoration of hosted exchange, but they are providing a temporary solution, which sounds like one of those things you have to do, but it's like, wow, maybe people won't come back. They're providing a temporary solution, which involves them giving you a single license and instructions on how to migrate your mail to Microsoft 365. And it's like, okay, well, if I go through all that, am I really going to come back and go back to this hosted exchange? Maybe so, because it's it's a more robust system in some ways. But they said they would provide the license until the outage is resolved, and they're also providing a forwarding option that will automatically route all mail that is arriving to an external mail address that you provide. So they do have something for you if you're struggling with that. Antwerp, Belgium is still trying to get all their services back online after an attack on their digital provider. So this is another supply chain kind of issue. The disruption is currently preventing access to services used by schools, daycare centers, police departments, and other citizen services in Belgium or in Antwerp. There is, which is in Belgium. But there's very little information yet on this attack, but they said that it points to a ransomware attack and that the attack was not on the city itself, but it was on their service provider, Digipolis. I don't know how to pronounce that, Digipolis, which apparently is providing administrative software tools. email, phone service, and almost all the Windows applications. So this must be like back-end software. Apparently, all of the Windows applications have been affected as well. I mean, I don't do that many ransomware stories anymore because, there's so many every day. But just to remind you that, you need to have a plan in place. And this is the important one. I'm going to do another story about this. You need to exercise it. Not just have a plan, and ensure that you understand the impact of the supply chain as well. Because just saying we've got all our stuff under control, if you're going to be impacted by cloud outages like Exchange, like hosted Exchange, or cloud outages like this provider, or even your actual internet connections, you really need to have a continuity plan that you have practiced, or you're probably going to be down for a while. And in this case, you're at the mercy of somebody else. In that same light, then, a post-mortem of the New Zealand Health Board cyber attack, and this is a pretty famous cyber attack now, was actually released. So they put some information out. The outage was a month long. It was an outage at the Health Board in New Zealand last year, and it showed, and I'm not going to go through there's details about the attack and the report and all this stuff if you're interested. But here, the point of me reporting this was, it showed that despite the fact that New Zealand's health board was prepared and they had clear awareness of cybersecurity priority, the response to the incident was damaged by a lack of practical preparedness and missteps. And I mean, I'll tell you a story. So when I was auditing these kind of things, we usually went in and asked companies if they had a plan. And this is when I started learning that even the fact that I was extremely paranoid and cynical was not enough, because sometimes they just flat lied. And they said, of course we have a plan. And you said, can I see it? And they would be, oh, no, that's a restricted document. And you're like, no, I mean, we need to see it. We have approval. And they'd be like, oh, okay, I got to come clean. Yeah, we sort of have a plan. It says, do good things. But the other ones that actually did have a plan, they said, of course we have a plan. We spent a whole bunch of time and energy on this. And so our audit strategy was that the next step was we would go, okay, let me see the plan. And when I could actually see the plan, basically what happened was, and my teleprompter just died, and I'm not, okay, so I'm not sure what to do here. I think we need to, cut, probably. I'm sorry. All right, we had a small technical difficulty there. I fell off the stool and landed I'm just kidding. We had a small technical, so we're going to pick it back up there. So the story we're talking about was a post-mortem of the New Zealand Health Board cyber attack was released. And I'm not going to go through the whole report, and you are welcome to, and the link is there. But this outage that this was reporting on was a month-long health board outage last year, and it showed that despite being prepared with clear awareness of cybersecurity priority, and the response to the incident was damaged by a lack of practiced preparedness and missteps. And I mean, so when we were auditing people, I usually went and asked them if they had a plan. And some of them, would say, yeah, I have a plan. And we would ask to look at the plan. And the plan would be like, a sheet of paper that says, in the event of emergency, and that was all it said. Other people said, we have a plan. And our first step in that was then to say, okay, an incident has just started. And that person right there that I knew they were depending on has just vanished in a puff of smoke due to some kind of alien probe attempt. What do you do first? And, I'm not just saying, because they would always go, we call Chet. I'm like, okay, call Chet. And then they, the number would be bad, and it usually just degenerated from there. They would, this number's been disconnected. He must have got a new phone. We don't know how to contact him. How do you contact legal? Oh, it's we don't actually have that number. I would get Debbie. Oh, she's on vacation this week. And it was amazing how quickly plans degenerated. And it was a Sun Tzu that said, like most plans don't survive first contact with the enemy. Maybe it was Sun Tzu. Could have been General Patton. I don't know. Somebody said that. But I can make all kinds of plans to work out, and I can spend millions of dollars on equipment, training plans, and protein powder and everything else. But if I don't actually practice, I don't work out, I don't actually go skiing, I'm probably not going to be able to ski effectively just from watching and reading about skiing. That helps, but it's better than nothing. But you really, you can read all the material in the world, but it doesn't substitute for actually exercising that plan. So you need to be exercising them. And I don't mean the one where the CISO says, we're good, right? And you say, we're good. And everybody puts check marks in boxes. You actually need to conduct exercises, even beyond tabletop exercises, to go to the point where you're actually saying, call that person, enact this plan, restore the backups, and see what happens. Because you're going to find problems in your plans if you do that. And like I say, if you call your legal team and the number's outdated, who do you call then? It's a big deal. So read this article and start practicing and exercising your plans. In the same light, the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, issued a warning to healthcare about Royal ransomware. So this was another one. The Royal ransomware was first reported back in September, and it is used by a financially motivated attacker that uses known tools for various actions like exfiltration. In fact, initially they were saying this looked like another ransomware as a service type, attacker, but then they realized that this is a private group that actually is using this thing that they're calling Royal ransomware. The group demands ransoms anywhere from $250,000 to millions of dollars. Royal is apparently operated by a private group, which seems to consist of experienced attackers from other groups based on the elements used. So they're just sort of, extrapolating what might be going on here. It's written in C++. It deletes volume shadow copies and then encrypts data on local drives and network shares with AES. So pretty typical ransomware. But they did issue a warning that this is actively being done. So if you're in healthcare, you may want to read up on this and make sure you have, some new warnings and so forth. Google Tag issued an announcement on the 7th of December that a North Korean-backed threat group was exploiting an Internet Explorer 0 day in the wild. The group, which is just called APT37, has traditionally targeted users in South Korea, and in particular, they target journalists, policymakers, activists, and North Korean defectors. The flaw that they're using to do this is in a JavaScript engine, and it allows remote code execution. It's a little old, I guess. Microsoft stopped supporting Explorer earlier this year, so in theory, people have been getting off of the Explorer train. But this flaw actually may be exploited in Office documents because the Explorer base engine is still integrated in Office. The attack used the Seoul Halloween tragedy where 160 people were crushed to death. If you saw, it was awful. And they're using that as a lure. So it's a pretty sleazy, awful, it's what you would expect from an evil, nation state. But they're using that as a lure, and they're getting victims to that click on the lure to download an RTF remote template. And if you're familiar with that RTF remote template can then fetch remote HTML. So they pull that down and then exploit this JavaScript problem. TAG was unable to determine what the final payload was, but they said that APT37 in the past has used various implants which typically abuse cloud services as a command and control channel and have typical backdoor features. So a lot of, if you have that kind of preparedness to deal with that sort of stuff, egress, monitoring and so forth, you may be able to thwart this, but be careful. A group linked to Iran named Agrius is using a new wiper in attacks which target South African, Israeli, and Hong Kong firms as well as United Arab Emirates organizations. The group's been active since 2020 and is exploiting known vulnerabilities for initial access. So unlike phishing attacks, they're actually using known vulnerabilities, so, patch up. They had previously used a tool called Apostle Wiper, which is disguised as ransomware, and which is, to me, kind of ironic. But, this is one of those things where you're trying to realize what to do about the ransomware. It's actually wiping all your drives. And then they updated Apostle into actual malware later. But their newly identified wiper is built based on that Apostle model. But it did drop the whole ransomware masquerade business. The new one is named Fantasy by whoever does the naming of these things. I really want the job, but then you're going to get a lot more stuff called Octorang and Burrowing Parasite if I get that job. But it'll be fun, right? Fantasy apparently was first used against a diamond industry firm in South Africa back in March, and that was 3 weeks after the organization was infected through an unknown vector with credential harvesting tools, but they said they used known, so they probably coming in through any one of these known public exploits. They spent time in the system doing recon and lateral movement before they deployed the Fantasy execution tool, which that tool is called Sandals. Again, it's not that cool of a name, but these same tools and this same pattern was used against other victims in Israel and Hong Kong. Other tools that they were using were Minidump, Secrets Dump, and Host2IP, which all, in various combinations allow for the harvesting of usernames, passwords, host names, and so forth. So it sounds like that the wiper is being used just to cover up their exfiltration of data. So maybe that was what the ransomware thing was too. So they make it look like, I know I've seen this before. I call this like throwing a match over your shoulder as you walk out the door, and the whole place explodes like in all, every action movie ever. So Nicolas Cage throws, a lit Zippo lighter over his, right shoulder, and the building goes up. And this is kind of what I've seen people do. Fantasy replaces the contents of targeted files. So this is definitely a wiper because it's going in and actually wiping the contents, and then it deletes them. So even if you try to recover, you're getting back garbage. It clears the Windows event log. It tries to delete the entire system drive, so it doesn't even want you to be able to boot up. It clears the system cache memory. It overwrites the master boot record, and then it deletes itself. So you're basically left with a dead hard drive that's got nothing on it. So definitely keep an eye out for this. Lensa, which is the latest rage in AI art. So there's so many of these now. But Lensa allows you to subscribe. So this is a pay service. And you upload, I think they said 8 to 50 pictures of yourself, and then basically ask Lensa to generate versions of you in a lot of different formats. Like, what if I was an elf in an anime? The same kind of stuff that you're doing with DALL-E and so forth. But these things are really popular on social media to create avatars. And we all pretty familiar with this. But an interesting issue in this article emerged, basically a claim that Magic Avatars, which is another service, has been using artists' techniques without consent has been made. And it's not really clear how the law applies. So it's kind of like that business where, people reproduce Vermeers, they use that same magic camera or whatever that's called, camera, I don't remember what it is. I'm sure all of you know what it is. But you use that where you project the image and then paint over it. And so I guess a lot of artists had their catalogs dumped into these training sets. And I don't mean like, old masters like Vermeer, but I mean modern, current artists were seeing things they had developed and posted online being dumped into the AI training set. And that means that the style that they use becomes a style the AI can duplicate. And, because I always ask DALL-E 2 for, art painted in the style of Hieronymus Bosch or painted in the style of Rembrandt or whatever, because it gets you back some pretty cool art that you kind of have a feeling for it. Now, Bosch and Rembrandt have been dead for a while, so neither of them probably care and would think the whole thing was witchcraft or something anyway. But basically, Lensa is using some base avatars as its training set, and some artists say these styles belong to them. Now, Lauren Ipsum, who's an artist, said, quote, artificial intelligence may have created these original avatars, but smaller elements that feed the creation, color palettes, brush strokes, textures, individual styles, were taken from artists like herself without consent, credit, or compensation. Now, Lensa uses Stable Diffusion, which is an open source neural net, and it basically learns by grabbing images from the internet. So it goes out, and I don't know if it's scraping them or how it gets them, but however it gets them. And that the basic set used 5.85 billion images paired with text as a training set. So this is classic neural net kind of stuff. Now, Leon 5B is the database of all these images and text. So that's what the name of that is. And Leon 5B is legal, apparently, and that it's absorbing images as a nonprofit research entity, and therefore it seems like this is somehow allowed. And I'm not an attorney, so, if you are, you're welcome to think about this. But Lensa, so this is the problem. Lensa is taking the nonprofit research database and monetizing this database for sale, which means somebody's probably going to have to explain all this to a judge who has a flip phone at some point. So that's definitely worth the read. I had a problem with this myself. There was a database of forensic cases, and one of the things I had to sign was that I would not use anything from this database, for any sort of monetization, which, wasn't a huge problem. Anyway, check it out. Well, the threat of the week for me is going to be best intentions. I saw this story, and it's quite interesting to me about this. Larry Hogan, who is the outgoing governor of Maryland, of the state of Maryland in the United States, issued an emergency executive order banning state employees from using a whole bunch of things this week. Just up and banned it. Okay, I'm gonna put out an executive order. Now, understand, I'm not knocking Larry Hogan or bashing this and that's why I call this best intentions. But I did want to talk about it a bit because, in this emergency cybersecurity directive, the state of Maryland flagged 8 companies that present, quote, an unacceptable level of cybersecurity risk to the state. And they immediately banned those companies from being used by the state government employees for any official business. Now, the list includes Huawei, wow, big surprise, ZTE, again, big surprise, Alipay, a big surprise, Tencent, big surprise, WeChat, QQ Wallet, and Kaspersky. No surprises on the list. I mean, none at all. I'm surprised the list isn't a lot longer, but that all of those companies, if you're unfamiliar with them, are usually either Chinese companies. Most of them are Chinese, and Kaspersky is a Russian company. The order has a 2-week timeline for everyone to stop using TikTok on the state's dime, I guess. I mean, I get it. All my life, Russia and its larger former counterpart, the Soviet Union and China, have been designated hostile foreign powers. Eurasia and Eastasia, at least in the novel 1984. But so it seems like it would follow that the U.S. government and state governments would not use products, software, material, and such that were manufactured by hostile foreign powers, right? I mean, that makes sense to me. But now Russia didn't used to have very much we wanted. Right? I mean, you look at stuff from Russia, and they didn't really make things that a lot of Americans wanted to consume. Now, I personally like borscht quite a lot, and caviar is good. And if you want a Zaz 968, which if you've never seen a Zaz 968, it is like the coolest looking car. It's like a cartoon version of the Corvair my dad had. I mean, literally, it looks like a cartoon version, like made by one of those AIs of a Corvair. But China? Well, I mean, how many things on my desk when I was writing this were made in China? I mean, it's just like, okay, Chinese. I mean, and not because I typically go out of my way to buy Chinese things, but I'm holding an iPhone. I mean, that was probably made in China. Intel, probably made in China. I mean, how many of the apps on my system were written in China or Russia? But I mean, Russia spent a lot of time developing their computer science programs, and so they make a lot of apps too. So we do want things from hostile foreign powers that we can't get at home. I mean, who needs a Vaz 2101 when you can just buy a Fiat 124 that was made in Italy? And I mean, that car kind of looks like a Fiat 124. And if you're wondering, these are all really old cars that I like. East Germany and Russia made some awesome, fun cars, like Ladas and all those kind of things back in the day. And they weren't necessarily good cars. And some of them are like famous for being bad cars, like Moskviches and those kind of things. But they're fun and interesting. But anyway, let's think about the whole problem then. So, and I know it's slowly going to slink back around to being about supply chain anyway, but this is an interesting emergency directive. Best intentions, So now you can't use TikTok on your state-issued phone. That sounds like a good idea to me. But can you have TikTok on your personal phone that's in your pocket connected to the Wi-Fi in the state offices? I mean, maybe the directive actually gets that granular about it and they explain it. But I mean, I have this state-issued lockdown phone that can only have good old American apps on it, but my other device in my pocket is loaded down with Kaspersky 10-cent games, Alipay, Shipion, Super Great Gamer, Xiangdi, and so forth. And again, I'm not saying this was a bad move, and I'm not bashing the governor for doing it. I'm just wondering if it will actually accomplish anything. I mean, other than let people feel a little better, best intentions. I mean, how locked down are the state of Maryland devices? Do they contain Chinese-made chips, Chinese-made UEFI, and network stacks, and Chinese-made apps that weren't covered? I mean, is there some kind of S-bomb in the state of Maryland that says, I realize this game didn't come from China, but it uses the engine that Tencent developed and was licensed? I mean, how do you keep this under control? Do they really understand that my new all-American gamer with American apple pie weapon game was coded in India and used modules developed by the Rhodesian secret police in China, who actually bought all the code from a guy in Iran named Bert? I mean, that's kind of where it starts to go off the rails, right? Because it sounds like a good idea, like those 10-cent games. But I mean, how many other games that people have on their phones were actually coded with APIs and libraries and who knows what that were written in Russia? I mean, that's how I would do it. I mean, think about the cars again. Maybe you have a cool American car, right? I mean, what's more American than a Cadillac? I don't particularly like them, but, the Cadillac CT6 2018 model was made in Shanghai. Cadillac, but it was made in Shanghai. The ever iconic Swedish Volvo, China. Then it gets even more complicated. Volvo, which has this software they're always trying to sell everybody called Polestar. Well, guess what? Polestar is a Chinese brand that was formed as a joint venture between Volvo and China's Zhejiang Geely Holding, which is the largest automaker in China. And wait for it, Geely Holding, I see you shiver with anticipation, owns Volvo. What? So Geely Holding, which is a Chinese company, and note that they never use Zhejiang on their website, it's just called Geely Holding, owns Volvo. And, they also own drivetrain systems, which makes transmissions. And here's the best one. They own London Taxi. So, those black cabs in London that you ride in that you always think, wow, what's more British than a black cab? Those are owned by a Chinese auto manufacturer and made in China, instead of Austin, who used to make them. And I don't know, other people made them too. But, I mean, I'm not sure it's as simple as just blocking TikTok anymore. Can a state employee drive an Atlas Pro? That's a Geely car, by the way, and it's sold in Russia, too. It looks a lot like a Volvo or maybe like a Highland or a Nissan a Pathfinder was what I thought it looked like. So which app should be banned? And what does the ban actually do? It prevents you from installing TikTok on your state phone. Again, I'm not saying that's a bad move. Prevents you from installing TikTok on your state phone or your laptop. But what about BYOD? I mean, if I bring my laptop into the DMV to work, and I always thought I'd make a great DMV employee because I can give that disdainful glare, the withering look at people who are trying to explain how they lost their tags in an alien probing situation while they were drunk. But if I do bring in my laptop, connect to the network, well, what are the rules there? And maybe they have all this locked down in Maryland. I don't know the CISO. I haven't talked to them or anything like that. But it's a really complicated issue. And how long before somebody starts screaming freedom in an Australian accent and refusing to remove Call of Duty from their phone? also Chinese. I mean, it's complex, right? I mean, it's a scary rabbit hole you can go down, and you end up with a storage unit filled with yarn linking pictures of Mao to Martha Washington to Archer and wandering around Chelsea wearing a tinfoil hat or maybe tinfoil wrapped around all your teeth to prevent the government waves from taking over your uvula. But it definitely begs a complex question of just how locked down can we be in this modern mesh environment. It's really scary. I didn't particularly, appreciate having to add the econ department to the mainframe because those commie pukes could, they just wanted to use Minitab, but I didn't like them. I mean, let alone allow some clown walk into my network with a copy of Crazy Racing Kart Rider on their phone. Come on, punk. Do you feel lucky? Well, do you? It's rather scary. I do think Governor Hogan is on the right track, and I'm glad that he started trying to do this. But he may well be driving a Tugela. Sorry, Geely, but that's a really funny name in English. But in the end, I don't know if any of this will help. It's all interconnected, and it's getting worse by the hour. Is ChatGPT writing this whole show and taking over my brain? It might be. And who could know? Maybe ChatGPT is using an engine from China, so it's injecting, Chinese, politics into my show. Yes, praise Mao. Anyway, and finally, if you haven't heard about ChatGPT, which I just mentioned, well, you probably heard about it, but I don't know, maybe you haven't. But it's another AI tool that can write your term paper on Franklin Pierce for you, correct your coding, or even write you some new code based on a request. So it's getting a lot like the enterprise computer. And, you say, hey, computer, I need this algorithm. And Majel Barrett says, computing, and they give it, yeah. It could maybe even write a podcast script. I saw some stuff about that. So supposedly it's the most advanced chatbot to date. I have not had a chance to actually fiddle with it yet. It was built by OpenAI that also made DALL-E 2, which I've used a lot. And its first 5 days of operation, 1 million people agreed to test it. And I think Aaron Levy's tweet says it all. Quote, ChatGPT is one of those rare moments in technology where you see a glimmer of how everything is going to be different going forward. And I really agree with him. I think that this is one of these moments which maybe we'll all be talking about in 15 more years going, remember that day when all that stuff took over and now we're all living under Skynet rule. It is really cool, though, so check it out. And that's the news. I'll see you next week on the Security Weekly News.